at the Polish Center on Saturn Avenue. Shows begin at 9 each day. You get the information at twoguyshows.com. I'm Chuck Whitaker with traffic on the Tan Talk Network.
Tune in to the Shrink and Wrap Show here on Tan Talk Radio. Our stories and our topics will include, but are not limited to, everyday issues. We're here for you, for our listeners. We want to know what's important to you. So again, don't miss us on Tan Talk Radio. Tune in again, Shrink and Wrap Show. We'll see you then.
The Shrink and Wrap Show at its new time, Thursdays from 4 to 5 p.m. here on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Hi, I'm Dawn Reese with the Dawn Reese Show, most powerful names in entertainment, every Thursday at 5 p.m. I have so many different segments I'm so excited to share with you, from miracle stories to celebrity interviews with Hollywood connections to travel to local business, promoting your business on the air with me, an amazing opportunity to grow your business. Tune in to the Tan Talk Radio Network, 106.1 FM on Thursdays, 5 p.m. with me, Dawn Reese.
Hey everyone, it is Brandy Joy with the Brandy Joy Joyride. Feel free to hop in and have a good time with us every Thursday from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. This show is brought to you by One Unit, dedicated to bringing people together, letting your voices be heard, and of course we're here to entertain you, upbuild you, inspire you, and even hear from you. So every Thursday, tune in to 106.1 FM, Brandy Joy Joyride, and we will hear from you and let's have some fun.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
You are about to enter the arena of real news and factual commentary on The Voice of Reason here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Now, here is your host for today's program, Ed Golly.
Well, over the past decade, public perception and socioeconomic data indicate that the United States has lost ground or faced mounting challenges in key domestic and international arenas, notably federal debt, political and social polarization, and housing affordability. With me in the Tan Talk studio, my co-hosts, all attorneys. First, former Circuit Judge Kevin Carey. Hello, Kevin.
Hello, Ed.
Attorney Chris Griffin. Nice of you to be here, Chris.
Good morning.
And our senior political analyst, Gary Gibbons.
I'm usually the senior person in the room, so I'm glad to hear that.
Well, later on in the program, how and when can we return the Department of Injustice back to what it's really intended to be? And will the Republican Party ever function as a body of courage? Or is it going to remain a political Politburo for the rest of this century, maybe? Anyway, I want to begin with you, Chris. Where has America ended up, and where do we need to be? Let's talk about some of these issues.
Sure. And I made the comment about being senior in the room just a second ago, but sometimes I hear myself sounding like the old man on the lawn saying, "You kids get off my lawn." But
incidentally, tell us a little about yourself.
Sure.
You're a mediator,
sure.
And
I was born and raised in Tampa, went to public schools there, including Hillsborough High School, went off to Florida State for undergraduate in law education, was a trial lawyer in Tampa for 40 years. And last 10 years, I've been a mediator. So that's what I do professionally. Know both of these good gentlemen from my time in the practice of law, but that's the quickie on my background.
Okay. And Chris's dad was a circuit judge.
That's right.
Very, and Chris he also was a defensive back at Florida State, and we were colleagues at Carlton Fields for a period of time.
He can run faster backwards than I can forwards.
Wow.
And I usually am. But my point in saying that is that my answer to your questions, Ed, comes from a perspective of, and I'm searching for the right word, and the only one that comes to mind is reverence for our country and our system of government. I visited Washington, D.C. countless times on both business, and my son was a student at Georgetown. I would go visit him. I tell people when I got in the cab, there weren't Ubers back then, and drove along the Potomac, looking across the river to the monuments in Washington. And to me, it's like entering a church. It is a place to be revered, respected, and protected. And what concerns me as much as any of the policy issues that beset us today is that I have 2 children, grown children, but I have 3 young grandchildren, and I am very concerned about the examples being set by our elected officials in the way we literally speak to each other, and it's more speaking at each other. And I know this sounds pie in the sky, but we need to be careful, and I say it from the perspective of a grandparent, we need to be careful that we teach our young people that using the F-bomb from a committee dais, calling a female reporter a pig, those are just 2 gross examples, but that needs to stop. And our children, I can remember sitting around and listening to Lyndon Johnson and Everett Dirksen and Howard Baker and people who they could speak against their own party because they spoke with courage and they spoke in a civil way. And I know it sounds trivial compared to a lot of the larger issues, but my main issue, Ed, is civility and being a country in which, even if we deeply disagree, that we can do so civilly.
Ed, you mentioned it. You've been surrounded by 3 lawyers. It's really much of the same discussion we've had in the practice of law about civility and professionalism. And I've been a lawyer not quite as long as you, but not too far behind you. I've been a lawyer for 43 years. But it's the same type of concept that just, you can disagree, but there's a level of civility that, and I agree with you, Chris. I've got 3 grandsons. It's not, and we talked about this, it came up a couple months ago, a couple weeks ago, and I'm glad we're having this topic today. This is not acceptable. And you gave some very good examples of that, Chris. And we need to speak out. And yeah. I do believe a majority of the country doesn't disagree, a double negative, agrees with us on this.
Right.
So it's a lot and Gary, an attorney as well, it's a lot of what we've been facing in the legal profession for many years.
How do you think the rest of the world perceives us? They see that we put this vulgar, crass, corrupt grifter in power.
Tell me what you really think, Ed.
Re-elect him. and they're thinking, well, is this? I mean, I grant you that he's never received 50% of the popular vote, but he ends up in office, in public office, and doesn't the rest of the world look at us and say, "What the hell is wrong with those people?"
Yes, they do. Now, I was on a foreign vacation recently over to parts of Europe, and I didn't poll people, but I did walk up to people from time to time and say, I apologize for Donald Trump. I did. But there's the point you're making, Ed, about how we are currently perceived by those in other countries and other parts of the world. But I think if you drill down just a little bit, the more important issue and troubling issue is that we have shown ourselves to be anything but a reliable partner on the world stage. Best example right out of the box in 2020 or 2016 was ripping up the existing Iran nuclear accord. We all know where that got us. But you can, for centuries, the United States of America, principally through the last 70 years, has been the beacon of stability and hope and peace. And I don't think any foreign leader with any sense is going to give us the type of trust that we've been used to getting over these past decades, because they know even if, let's say, wave your magic wand and Democrats take over the House, the Senate, and the White House, the way they'll look at it, I'm sure, is, well, we don't know who comes next. So we have left a lot on the field, if I can use a sports metaphor, that in terms of trust around the world. And that's very concerning because, as you know, ever since World War II, a lot of the liberal world, and I use the word only in a political theory sense, they've looked to us and they have learned that they can't look to us any longer. And I think that's because you look at things that we can change, and I have a couple of examples of that to talk about later. But that can't change because the deed is done. That creates that lack of trust. Boy, I'm really going to cheer people up today, right?
Well, part of the discussion will be what we can do to make it better. And I do think having this discussion is a good start. And it is as basic as behavior. I mean, for a president to call a reporter a pig, and for the F-bomb to be used by a senator at a Senate Judiciary hearing or Senate, whatever committee it was, it's just unacceptable. It's like, Chris, with your dad was a judge. Judges will say that is not acceptable. That behavior, just like your kindergarten teacher, it's like you're treating a child. But it has to start, and you're right, the capital that we've taken, hundreds of years to build could be destroyed. Just like, again, one note pony about lawyers, judges would tell lawyers, you can spend 30 years trying to make a reputation and you can ruin it in
a day, in an hour.
So, but we could go on and on, but you can
see.
It's
let me make comparing things to, and we all know the lawyer jokes, and we know that some people have a dim view of lawyers. I think the three of us do not. But since we're talking about politics, I was one of the Al Gore team recount lawyers in 2000. And the folks on the other side were Republicans. They were people I'd been in court against. They were friends of mine. And what you saw in that exercise was what we do in the courtroom, which is we argue for our client to the nth degree. And then literally go out and have a beer afterwards because we don't take it personally. We argue our client's point, and that's what we did in the recount. We knew what the law was, we knew what the statutes and the rules were, and we argued from that, and somebody won and somebody lost. As simple as that. And I really hope that we can get back to a place where civil discourse is the rule.
Well, isn't the decay of trust not only abroad, but also internally in what we're going to see in the election process this time around?
You're absolutely right. And it's interesting that we would go there from my mention of the 2000 recount. The damage that's been done to public trust in elections is severe.
Yes.
Even if no true fraudulent voting is found, the seeds that have been planted into persons' thought process, there's no such thing as a perfect election. Gary and I worked on recounts and the like, and there's no perfect election, but people have now been led to believe that not only is there no perfect election, but they are all completely imperfect to the point of being unreliable. That's another tough one, Ed, for us to come back from, for people to remain or return to having faith in their election outcome.
Well, Mark Elias is the host of the Democracy Docket. And let's listen to him as he looks at another attempt by our convicted felon in chief to rig elections through voter suppression.
A federal court has blocked the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services policy that bans nonprofit organizations from registering new citizens to vote at their naturalization services. This was not just a violation of the Administrative Procedure Act. This actually violated the Fifth Amendment's guarantee of equal protection. That what the Trump administration did here was not just a garden variety constitutional violation, but it intentionally discriminated against these new citizens in trying to limit their ability to register to vote. We're constantly being told by Donald Trump that they want to prevent non-citizens from voting. Well, explain this to me. Where else could you go to be more assured that the only people being registered to vote are U.S. citizens than literally a citizenship swearing in ceremony? The only people being registered, they just became citizens. You want proof of citizenship? Look, they just got sworn in. And yet, that is the exact community that this policy put in place in 2025 by this administration targeted. There can be no better evidence that this administration wants to disenfranchise, wants to make it harder for people to register to vote simply because of where they came from, simply because They are new citizens. And simply because this administration believes that these newly sworn in Americans might not support Republican candidates.
Mark Elias has been a hero in terms of the election world right now. And the biggest area, we talk about voter suppression in here every week. The biggest area he sees voter suppression is based on, there are two cases. One came out Tuesday, I want to talk about briefly. They're both federal cases out of Massachusetts. Federal Judge Indira Telwani, who's a federal district judge in Massachusetts. One of them was the case brought, we've talked about this before, 23 states and DC attorneys general brought an action that the cuteness, I liked your comment about Miller last week. He must, what did you say, hang like a bat from the ceiling when he sleeps. He comes up with these smarter than anyone in the room ideas. And the idea, which I don't know if our listeners or viewers are aware of this, is that, and it's tied back to the issue of mandating we've complained about Trump saying we're not going to give you benefits unless you turn over your voter roll information. And Elias's point is the biggest aspect of voter suppression he is concerned about, although he's concerned about things we've talked about, Ed, like the day of the election, there being people, goons at the polling places. But what it was focused on is this mailing issue, because what these attorneys general brought was a suit to enjoin this executive order, which was illegal. But what it did, it was mandating the postmaster general or the U.S. Postal Service, I guess, not to send out ballots unless that person was on this master citizen voter registration, which the Homeland Security Department would be in charge of. So talk about schemes last week with this tax case, this IRS case that Trump brought. This was a scheme. So in essence, it would certainly harm Democrats because more of those people affected are Democrats. But anyway, the federal judge several months ago entered an injunction, but that only applied to those 23 states that were Democratic attorneys general and the DC. Another 27 other states. I can assure you, Florida was not a party to that lawsuit. But that then went to the First Circuit, which they denied relief. It's now gone to the Supreme Court, and as recently as yesterday, the Solicitor General is saying we need you to rule. They're whining because the order gave 60 days. It was an illegal order, right? But it said it had to be done within 60 days of the midterm, which is coming up because it's now, we're now when we get into early September. And by the way, the Department of Justice is not arguing that the executive order was improper, because it clearly is. The Constitution makes clear the states regulate the time, manner, and place of elections. The Congress has the ability to override that, not the president. So this is illegal. But they've argued is standing, and there's a concept of ripeness, which I know Chris and Gary know. But standing, the point being, they were arguing that the plaintiffs did not have the ability. How were they harmed? And the court disagreed. And I would, again, this gets in the weeds to some degree, suggest to our listeners and viewers to go and with the internet, read these opinions. This is a very good opinion by the same district judge had both cases. More importantly, though, so we could get an order from the Supreme Court tomorrow because that's an emergency.
It's on their
shadow docket, which Gary, we've talked about. That's this black box. And but this week, that same judge entered an order that is more important because it doesn't just affect those 24 jurisdictions. It affects all. It's a nationwide injunction. It was brought by various nonprofits, primarily the League of Women Voters. And the court again strongly said this is not going to fly. There's an injunction now from the scheme going forward, and time is actually an ally for us here. Yep. Because more time goes on, so it's nice to see them whining. We've talked about, Gary, in many of these cases over the last year or so, how they appeal this, and there was one case I remember, Gary, where it sat with the appellate court forever. So time was not our ally, but this is a case where. So it's they love delay, and now they're whining about delay. So it's nice to see the shoe on the other foot. I don't want to go on and on, but it's a very important decision because the mail-in voting is very prevalent, including Trump, who voted twice in the last few years by mail-in. So it's of course that's just hypocrisy. But anyway, there are many cases right now. Elias has made the point, and he's not a braggart. He works hard.
He's a darn good lawyer too.
He is, but they are the DOJ and Trump is 0 for 21. in these issues with mail-in ballots. They are fighting this, what's the term, whatever, tooth and nail. And by the way, 0-1 with the First Circuit, because the First Circuit, they lost there. So they're 0-22. So something here is right. There's no mixed opinion by these federal judges on this. Now,
Right.
I'm sure Trump is whining about this liberal judge. I have no idea, who appointed this judge, but the opinion was very well written. And again, there is no legal basis to say that the president has the ability to enter this executive order.
Not at all.
So anyway, I'll stop.
But they're playing games like they did with the birthright citizenship case. When it went up the first time, they didn't want to talk about the merits of birthright citizenship. They wanted to talk about whether you could have a nationwide injunction.
That's right.
And they're doing the same thing here. You mentioned ripeness. That's what they're arguing to the Supreme Court now is you don't need to rule on this yet because this isn't ripe. And they don't want the Supreme Court to actually say this is a bunch of crap. That what you're trying to do is you're trying to federalize the state-run election system that we have in this country. And you're trying to force states to turn over their voter rolls to the feds so that the feds can make a list of people that are quote unquote eligible voters and then send that to the post office and have the post office have to check that list to determine whether or not you can get a frickin' mail ballot sent to your house. It's insane, but they are trying to run out the clock with the Supreme Court and not have them rule on this so that they can then send ICE or somebody else to seize ballots and declare some sort of national emergency and disrupt the elections without a Supreme Court ruling. And then they'll come back later to argue about the merits.
Well, they even had the disingenuous to argue that, well, if any of this is illegal, and they did not address the merits, you're right, it was about ripeness and about standing. But, Mark Wayne Mullen, who's the head of the Department of Homeland Security, is involved in this. And our good friend Todd Blanche, who's now the Attorney General based on the courage of our Louisiana and Texas and
North Carolina
senators. But they had the temerity and audacity to suggest to the judge that, if anything about this is illegal, I'm sure both Mullen or Blanche will push back. Literally, I'm not making that up. And of course, we have no confidence that Mullen and Blanche are anything other than lapdogs for this administration. So
If I may, just to make another point there, because it, once again, perhaps go from the macro to the micro. The real concern here is we can have these fights, both politically and inside the courts, but the greatest concern to me is that all of these fights, regardless of the actual outcomes, reduce, if not destroy, people's faith in elections. And so they're watching this and they're going to say to themselves, why am I even going to take the trouble to either seek a mail-in ballot or go to the polls? Because what I'm hearing is that it's all screwed up, it's all rigged, and my vote isn't going to matter. That's the real danger.
But if you've ever worked in an election and you've seen how all the ballots are accounted for, any that are spoiled are counted, and they're all, you turn all those numbers in at the end of the night. I've been a poll watcher for years, and you go in and you walk out amazed at how well the system really works. And for him to have all this rhetoric about how the elections are fraudulent when there's absolutely no proof of that. Every time he has to go to court and try to show evidence of it, that they lose because there isn't rampant fraud in our elections, but they keep repeating it over and over and over again so that people start to believe that. And it's very destructive to the system.
We did see fraud in the 2000 election when Catherine Harris threw thousands of big voters off the voting roll so that baby Bush could win Florida. Which brings me to another issue, Gary, which is the climate pressures, where the rest of the world is undoubtedly losing confidence in what should be United States leadership in dealing with climate change. When Gore won that election, if he had taken office, we would probably be 25 years ahead of where we are now. And instead, we see that we have an administration that wants us to continue to be a coal shoveling country, while China is moving ahead with great expediency toward green, clean energy, which makes a country energy independent.
Yeah, and I heard this week where black lung disease cases are exploding again because of the going back to mining coal. Well, yeah, why are we always fighting the last war? Why are we trying to look backwards all the time instead of trying to use science and use things that make sense for the
Because
planet?
a politician can shake down an oil company.
I was just going to say,
but
because
not the sun.
the people who pump oil make a lot more money than the people who manufacture wind turbines. And so I think Ed's point is spot on.
If you had a time machine, because these issues aren't new, if you had a time machine 20 years ago and said, where would we be in 2026? You'd be looking forward, back then, you'd be shocked to see the lack of progress in that area with fossil fuels and efforts made to just tear down these other alternatives aggressively.
I know Gary is much more schooled than I am on the environmental issues. And I certainly don't want to be the eternal pessimist, but I think we're probably certainly minimally past the tipping point in being able to control what ultimately is going to happen to the planet. Because if we had started, as Kevin just said, 30 or 40 years ago, we had a chance. And I'm not sure that chance exists anymore.
Yeah, I don't think I'd be buying any real estate down in Miami. It's going to be underwater in 50 years.
Beef prices have gone way up, and I heard an analysis last night that was tied to global warming and the fact that with the cattle they can't get the water and the feed in it. So this global warming, which apparently the other party in this country just denies, if you want to buy cheaper steak and hamburger, you should start accepting that concept of global warming.
Because let's face it, when the world drills up all the known reserves of oil and burns it and releases all that carbon into the atmosphere and the ocean, it probably won't be possible to live within 1,000 miles of the equator on either side of it. It'll just become inhospitable to humans. And why is this a good thing? Just to enrich a handful of people or the oil company executives? I've heard it argued that the oil companies should be nationalized. And if they were, then the decisions about how to use that resource would be in the interest of the people and the world, the citizens of the world, not just the United States, instead of the profit and loss statement of ExxonMobil or Chevron.
Well, the degree that Trump has got is incredible. As we've talked about on this show, he's terminated these wind contracts off the coast and then had to use taxpayer money to pay millions of dollars. I mean, you think it can't get worse, and it does.
Well, the great big beautiful bill, not only did it preserve all of the tax subsidies that the oil companies get here, they also included provisions to say that they could mine or drill for oil around the world and get tax breaks for doing that as well. So.
And that's a good example, Chris, of what you were saying earlier, that the world has looked to this country over the years, and one area is in energy. And when there's a consensus, there's no doubt about this
Right.
or debate. And we've got this United States going against the consensus. They're moving on. They're not looking to us.
And not just on global warming, but consensus on so many scientific matters, like the vaccination issues that came up from the Oval Office the other day. And I'm listening and I'm thinking, I don't want our listeners to put arsenic in their coffee.
Jump off the ledge.
But I think because I think it's important to note that the resistance, and I use a capital R when I write that exists today in our country against the problems that we've been discussing exists. It's large, it's strong. And the more we continue these conversations about what needs to be done, it will only get larger and stronger. And I urge people to not get overly discouraged, but understand that, as I've said on this program before, you're not alone. And there are a lot of people out there who think like you and will act like you. And finally, on the same point, and you made this earlier, Kevin, the courts have been so consistent, except for the Supreme Court, in holding the president's power in check. And I always had great faith in our courts before all of this, but now I certainly do because they call it like it is. And I just want people to be on guard as we are against the bad things, but understand that we have people who are working for the good thing at the same time.
Well, it's 34 minutes past the hour. You're listening to The Voice of Reason here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. I'm your host, Ed Golly, and joining me in the studio today, my co-host Gary Gibbons, Kevin Carey, and Chris Griffin. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to learn about the first official act of our United States Attorney General, and can the Department of Injustice ever be turned back to what it was originally intended to be? All that, along with more of the issues the conservatives never want you to hear about.
Are you a writer, inventor? Do you have questions about your intellectual property rights? Well, tune in every Tuesday and Thursday morning at 11 o'clock for Joy on Paper. Once a month, I will have a special guest, the writer's legal eagle, Bill Larson of Larson & Larson, who can answer your questions. Protect your valuable work. Email me your questions to patsy.radio@gmail.com and then listen in every Tuesday and Thursday at 11 a.m. right here on Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network. That's patsy.radio@gmail.com.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
In this week's rant, former Department of Justice Pardon Attorney Liz Oyer tells us about the first official act of our corrupt United States Attorney General, Todd Blanche.
I want to tell you about Todd Blanche's first official act as Attorney General. He papered over a whole bunch of future legal problems for Donald Trump. Let me explain. Just hours after Blanche was sworn in, DOJ issued a 21-page memo that massively expands the scope of executive privilege. That is a legal doctrine that allows the president and his advisors to keep their communications secret from the public, from Congress, and from the courts. In the past, the Supreme Court has said that executive privilege is only a limited privilege. It is not absolute, and it must be balanced against other interests. For example, if the president's communications are relevant to a criminal investigation or to a congressional inquiry, that might outweigh the privilege. Executive privilege has been unsuccessfully asserted by two past presidents with something to hide. One was Richard Nixon, who wanted to cover up his role in Watergate. The other is Donald Trump. In 2021, he tried to assert the privilege to cover up his role in the events of January 6th. A court said no, he could not claim that his communications related to January 6th were protected from disclosure. So back to yesterday's memo. Here's what it does. It lays out the Justice Department's new interpretation of the presidential communications privilege. It says that this privilege is actually so broad that it applies to all of the president's communications, even with people who don't work for the White House or who don't work for the federal government at all. This is an unprecedented and dubious legal interpretation. But here's why it's important. It now gives Donald Trump legal cover to refuse to produce any documents in response to congressional subpoenas. If Democrats win the midterms, there will be lots of investigations into the misconduct and corruption of this administration. Todd Blanche is trying to get ahead of those investigations with this memo, which Trump can now use as a shield. And it's not limited to Trump himself. The memo gives everyone who has ever spoken to Donald Trump a claim of executive privilege. For example, if Trump's sons are subpoenaed to testify before Congress or in court, the administration can squash their testimony by claiming executive privilege. So is this really legal? Well, the existing case law suggests that it is not. But here's the thing. The current Supreme Court has taken such an expansively broad view of executive power that they just might go for it. Remember, this is the same court that gave Trump absolute immunity from prosecution just 2 years ago. And even if it doesn't hold up in court, the memo will help Trump delay and obstruct potentially for years by tying things up in litigation. Thanks, Bill Cassidy.
Ed, on that point, it was we left here last Thursday, we still had a hope that he would not be the Attorney General. We had just learned that Susan Collins had voted against approving Blanche as Attorney General. And then The good news was then Lisa Murkowski followed suit in Alaska. So it did, when she just said, thank you, Bill Cassidy, it did come down to Bill Cassidy, who was a senator and a doctor from Louisiana who Trump had primaried. So thanks to Trump, he's not going to be a senator come January. And I was holding out some hope, because that would have, if he had voted no, it would have been 50 no's and 49 yes, because God knows where our Kentucky, your buddy from Kentucky is. So I've never seen a 50-49 vote on an attorney general or other cabinet member, and it's tragic. He, as we've talked about, he's not qualified to be attorney general. He's corrupt. He's in the pocket of Trump. There, I said it. It's true. And shame on the Florida senators. If I were running against Ashley Moody, my former colleague on the bench, I'd say, but for Ashley Moody, we'd not have that crook as attorney general. So thank you, Ashley Moody.
Yeah, well, Kim Jong-un is taking notes on this, isn't he? He doesn't have that kind of control in his.
Well, let me jump in, if I may. First of all, and I'm not, by saying this, I'm not arguing that it's okay for Todd Blanche to have been confirmed, but the executive, or the memo, the 21-page memo that Blanche produced, I don't care who becomes the attorney general, they're going to be directed by the White House. And I'm sure this idea for the 21-page memo came from the White House. So the real issue is all of the things that were done legislatively and otherwise after Watergate to allow the Department of Justice to be truly independent of the White House. Those are the norms that are being destroyed. And what Ms. Oyer said, in particular, at the end of what we played, executive privilege is a doctrine created by the courts. This memo carries no legal weight at all. The point, though, as she observed, is that it gives Trump a piece of paper to say, we don't have to answer these questions, at which point one has to resort to the courts to enforce a subpoena, those types of things. So I have confidence in just about any trial court in the country that hears a case based on this memo is going to find that it has no legal effect whatsoever. But as observed, wait till it gets to the Supreme Court.
Well, the last point on Blanche, we need to let our listeners know where he's going to court today for a federal judge, and he's about to be held in contempt. He has been directed to provide to, and we talked about this a little bit last week, in camera, a federal judge who's had enough of these shenanigans has said, I want the unredacted documents, and this is on Epstein. We're moving to Epstein. And he's twice, there've been two orders that he's pretty much ignored.
Blanche has ignored.
Excuse me. Blanche has ignored. Thank you, Chris. And he's ordered to go. He's in court. I don't know what time today, but
1 o'clock.
So as we speak, and there is, if our listeners or viewers want to listen to it, if you go online, there's a phone number you can actually call in. Federal courts, there's no television in federal courts, but there is audio. But I do think there's going to be a come to Jesus moment for Blanche very soon.
Well, in the first Trump administration, they tried to argue that Steve Bannon, who was not an employee of the executive branch, had that type of immunity with the president, and it didn't fly. But what has happened now, there's a legal advisor or person on MS Now, Lisa Rubin. She was talking yesterday about this particular 21-page order that they've created, and she believes that it is directly been written in order to try to stop any kind of depositions for a guy named Boris Epstein, who is also not part of the administration, but who Trump used in the settlements with all the big law firms. The American Bar Association has sued the Trump administration and has tried to get discovery and take depositions to show what communications there were between the White House and Boris Epstein in all these settlements. And she believes that this whole thing, that this 21-page order has now been written to try to stick a stick in the spokes of the bike so that you can't You
Right.
can't go forward and get any information from Boris Epstein because they're going to find that his fingerprints and the White House's fingerprints are all over this stuff.
If they get the information.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're just trying to stop information from coming out that would be harmful. And it's all stuff that we really need to know what happened. The fact that they were trying to silence these lawyers, they have First Amendment rights to represent whoever they want. And again, this part of the bullying that's been that's happened in this administration.
Well, and it just breeds, all of these topics breed cynicism, which I think any authoritarian like Trump needs, ignorance and cynicism. And this is a president who signed this act last November to expose this information. I know he didn't want to do it, but he.
You mean the Epstein files?
Yes, and so they're affirmatively ignoring their obligations, including the attorney generals, both Bondi and now Blanche, to not only turn the documents over, but to provide these privilege logs saying why they're not turning things over, which they're just not doing. They're pretty much telling the judges, F you.
And the three of us in this room, the three lawyers, know all too well the judges, at least the judges I've appeared before in federal court. If I hesitated once to give the judge what the judge required in terms of production of documents, I'd be sanctioned in a heartbeat. And so I want everybody to understand that judges are permitted to require the lawyers to produce all documents, even if the lawyers believe they have a credible argument that some of those documents should not be produced to the public because of privilege or other issues. But the judge has the ability and the authority. You use the term in camera, it means in chambers. And I've had those in chambers examinations where the judge sits down, looks at this document. I've claimed a privilege of whatever. And the judge looks at it and says, you're wrong. It goes in that stack. And that's what this judge has been wanting to do, which is to have the actual unredacted documents to be able to look at the document and see if it fits the description that Blanche and his lawyers have asserted of why it shouldn't be produced. And that's what they have been resisting. And today is going to be very interesting because this is, as you pointed out, this is their third time of disobeying his orders.
You know, having served on the circuit bench, if any lawyer said to me, or any judge, you know, in Hillsborough County, no, I'm not even going to give you the documents for in camera, which the purpose of the in camera, what that means is that it's not going out to the public, but the judge who's a neutral arbiter will review the documents and make a decision. And for someone to say, no, we're not even going to give this to you, it's this level of arrogance that I've never seen before.
Yeah. And they will remain unnamed, even though whatever I said would be positive, but I can think of several judges in our middle district of Florida who I would not want to be in front of making that argument. As my dad used to say, I'd be under the jail after that.
Well, and in this case, this judge is fed up. There's no mystery. In his orders, he's been clear. He's fed up, and he's about an inch from holding Blanche in contempt, which was one of the issues that was argued to these Republicans. I guess this guy could have been a serial killer, and they would have voted for Blanche. And you're right. I mean, Blanche, pick your poison. There was never going to be, someone of courage in there. It's a degree, but he is very close to being held in contempt. And that was one of the points that, Sheldon Whitehouse and others were making in the Senate Judiciary Committee. You want to prove a person, and they made this point, the Democrats. Look, I understand you're not going to put a liberal Democrat in that position, but there are many Republicans. It's cynical in that regard too. You're ignoring that there are good people out there that are conservative to put this guy that's about an inch away from being held in contempt by a federal judge. When did that standard be okay?
When did the standards become that the federal government doesn't cooperate with states in investigating crimes?
Murders.
And that's what's happened. Yeah, murders out in New Mexico. That there were some bodies that were found on the estate that Jeffrey Epstein had there, and New Mexico wants to investigate that. And Blanche, who's been the architect of stonewalling everything about the Epstein files, has said, no, we're not going to turn over any information that we have about They have all these documents that pertain to that property, and they won't share them with the states. I mean, come on. This has never happened in this country before.
And we've talked about in Minnesota. You've talked about, Gary, the two murders there. They have affirmatively been a problem. Not only have they been not helping, that they have been.
They won't produce any information. They won't cooperate at all.
You know, I was listening on the way down from Gainesville this morning to the Democratic gubernatorial, or I guess senatorial in Minnesota, because Klobuchar is running for governor, and her opponent is Tafoya, who's a sportscaster, and this is a little bit off mark. We're talking about Minnesota. They're talking about people can't afford, gas. And I don't know if you heard her quote. Tafoya's quote was, "Well, they just need to go one less time to Starbucks and be much more patriotic and be happy that we're fighting Iran." I mean, that was her attitude toward people that literally can't afford, $20 to get.
Sure.
I don't think they understand that people, they don't know how they're going to get to work every day and go to the basketball or football games because of the price of gas.
Well, but it would be sensible to short Starbucks stock, wouldn't it? And let me ask you this question. When I see this ICE group that is a bunch of 8th grade dropouts, undertrained, walking around with AR-15s, shooting people, and there's no investigation, isn't that the definition of a Gestapo?
Yes.
No investigation.
No, wait a minute.
No
There is an
accountability.
investigation. They're doing their own investigation. The Department of Homeland Security has been in charge of that now. So, every time you turn around, it's the fox guarding the hen house.
By the way, now be careful. They're now got these gloves. They're going to put their hand on you and electrocute you on the sidewalk for no reason.
Taser
necessarily.
gloves.
Yes, and they're spending millions and millions.
That news just came out
gloves.
yesterday,
Yes.
right? About these stun guns.
They've already
stun
spent
gloves.
millions on the body cameras, but they don't turn them on. So, or don't wear them.
There's a common theme here that we talk about week after week, that there are so many issues that need to be addressed that are not being addressed. It's, in accounting, it's called opportunity cost, what you're not doing. And they're not addressing any relevant issue. We're wasting our time on either non-issues or making, creating problems.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. You're right. If you look at what comes from the White House, it's very little is policy driven. Most of it, I always say that Trump governs on whim rather than policy. But if you look at what's happened to our government writ large, even if there were some sensible legislative proposals coming from either a Republican or a Democratic White House with the operation of the filibuster in the Senate, and I'm undecided on whether the filibuster should be done away with, but think of during Richard Nixon's term, we got the Environmental Protection Agency. Significant legislation, the Americans with Disabilities Act, things that make our country better for its citizens. And those types of sweeping policy issues simply cannot be addressed, even, as I say, even if a Democrat were in the White House. And I don't know what we can do about it because it is governed by the filibuster rule, but that's one of my larger concerns is, can we do anything on a policy basis along the lines of the acts and the legislation that I mentioned just a second ago?
Well, one of the problems now is Congress is paralyzed. They do nothing.
Right.
They, because they're all, the majority is Republican. They just kiss Trump's ass, and shame on them, shame on them. But these issues that Trump tries to deal with executive order should be issues debated in Congress. There's no debate in Congress about these issues. There should be a debate about whether this stupid glove issue, which came up 5 minutes ago, is a good idea. But it's millions of dollars that's going to be spent. And by the way, there's already a lawsuit that's going to be filed against it. The states are so everything he does creates a lawsuit, and probably correctly so.
Right.
So we waste money, we waste time. Why don't we focus on what ICE is doing wrong? I mean, they're arresting and citizens.
But there's the rub. You think it's wrong. The people you're talking about think it's spot on correct.
Well, let me change my word. Illegal.
Okay, there you go.
If people that don't agree with me want to change the law, but you don't think you're not a king, Trump, and you Steve Miller, Mr. Smartass, just here are these 1,000 executive orders for you to sign, which every one of them is going to be reversed when there's a Democrat in the White House come January 2029. So F you, Trump, it's not going to work. This country was based on having a discussion and a debate. We don't have those debates right now about policy issues.
No, and our country is far ahead of what Congress is doing. Every time you talk about an issue, let's talk about guns, for example. And, like 85% of the people in this country think that there should be real background checks. Does Congress ever talk about that? No. But it's again, the people are always out ahead of all these things. I'm in favor of getting rid of the filibuster completely, take it off the table, and then let the legislation get passed. And if you're an extremist and you want to pass a bunch of crazy stuff as a Republican and put it out there and let the public then decide, okay, this is what these people are really about. I don't want that. And let the Democrats come up and put their affordability package out there and let it stand. And that's going to require then addressing the Supreme Court, because they'll try to tear down anything that a Democratic administration tries to get through. They've already done it with Biden. Yeah, but just look at the forgiveness of the student loan debt situation.
Right.
They pulled something out of their butt to say this is a huge public interest item that we're just not going to let that stand. And yet
as an executive order.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And then they turn around and approve these executive orders that Trump does, that are equally as bad, but they're wearing their Republican hat when they're doing
briefly,
that.
One of the things that, in terms of these elections coming up, I think that is a major issue. It's easy to get mixed up with all these different primaries. But the Senate race, I am convinced that Tellerico is going to win that Senate seat in Texas. And I've spent a lot of time analyzing that. And we've talked about, Ed, how that is a flawed candidate. I'm glad Cornyn did not win that primary, because I think Cornyn would have won. But when Texas elects a Democrat senator, which hasn't happened since Lloyd Benson back 30 some years ago, that is a big deal. Texas is the second largest state. And what's happened, if you look at Texas, and I learned this a little bit last night I was listening to one of these talk shows, these cities in Texas, Democrats are winning in some of these cities that have not been winning. People, I don't think, pay attention to what's been happening. There has been a very strong movement toward Democrats. So when we have all these elections, I think, and I agree with this comment last night, if Texas goes Democrat, that's like all of a sudden it's okay. It's not a dirty word to be a Democrat, and it can happen even in Texas.
And the sky's not going to fall.
Right. And the point that this person was making is that also can affect, governor races around the country. Wait a minute. It's okay to, it's something, often it's one thing that can turn the tide. And I think, in my opinion, what that would be in this Senate races is what will happen in Texas.
In Texas. This came to mind because we were talking about ICE, and I keep returning to the rules of normalcy that have been destroyed. I have to make this personal. I drove up to a convenience store that had a gas pump, and I was going to get gas yesterday. And I pull up, and there are 3 marked Homeland Security automobiles, and they weren't parked in parking spaces. They were just randomly pulled up. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, what if I start to walk in and something begins to happen? Mm-hmm. And what bothers me is knowing that if that happens, it's almost completely likely that the persons who are perhaps trying to arrest someone, their faces are covered. If I, as a citizen, wanted to walk up to a Tampa police officer and say, "Excuse me, officer, do you mind telling me your name and your badge number?" They'll give you their name and their badge number. An ICE agent is not going to do that, is not required to do that. And if you really think about it, and that's why these things bother me so much, what a breach of everything we stand for, to have someone who is exercising law enforcement powers to be invisible in all important respects. Their face isn't shown. They don't even have to show ID.
And then they oppose any body cams.
Yeah.
You know, the police officers initially opposed, and then they're happy to see it, but ICE doesn't want the truth in these body cams.
Well, it's time for us to break for national and international news from the news organization that paid $785 million to Dominion voting machines after lying to you about election manipulation that they never committed. That, of course, is Fox Network News. Back with the second hour of The Voice of Reason, when we'll be looking at tribalism in America and how Robert F. Kennedy Sr. felt about what the function of the United States Senate should be. Ed Golly with Gary Gibbons, Kevin Carey, and Chris Griffin, inviting you to stay with us here on Tan Talk Radio Network. The Voice of Reason will return in just a few minutes with more of the issues that conservatives never want you to hear about. Okay.
WTAN, Clearwater.
FM 106.1.
WDCF, Dade City.
FM 102.3.
Listen.
Drama in the West Bank. I'm Dave Anthony, Fox News. Israel's military has relocated a Palestinian man who'd been trapped inside his home for days, surrounded by Jewish settlers, who U.S. Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee called terrorists.
Huckabee, who's voiced support for Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank, making the unusually critical comments after Israeli settlers besieged 3 Palestinian homes near Nablus, including one belonging to a dual U.S. citizen, trapping residents in their homes using rocks and tents and cutting off water and electricity. Huckabee posting on X, "There's no excuse for such thuggish behavior."
That's Fox's Lillian Wu. Israel's also continuing to attack Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza, killing one of the terror group's senior commanders. As the standoff continues over the Strait of Hormuz, Iran's Joint Military Command said today that no vessel gets through without their permission, after months of attacks disrupting oil and other shipping.
Iran's foreign minister also says the U.S. has long miscalculated due to intelligence failures, now an even bigger miscalculation on the Strait of Hormuz. This came after President Trump posted yesterday on Truth Social, saying in part the USA has total control over the Strait of Hormuz. Our naval blockade is being called by everyone a wall of steel. Still less than 10% of the average number of pre-war vessels are passing through the strait.
Fox's Trey Yingst in Tel Aviv. There's more ICE controversy potentially coming after all the protests over immigration raids. The Department of Homeland Security plans to provide ICE with gloves that can deliver electric shocks to deal with anyone not complying. Borders are Tom Homan tells Fox.
ICE officer assaults are higher than any other federal law enforcement agency in the nation. So they're just trying to protect themselves.
The Democrats don't like it.
Of course we are outraged.
New York Attorney General Letitia James vows if anyone gets hurt by these shock gloves, the state will take action. America's listening to Fox News.
From around the world, Trey Yingst, joining us from Tel Aviv, Israel, to Washington.
I'm Mike Emanuel.
To your own backyard. If a story impacts you or your wallet, we're on it. It's the Fox News Rundown. We give every story the deeper look it deserves with must-listen interviews and smart analysis from the voices you can trust. Start your day with the Fox News Rundown. Listen and follow now at foxnewsrundown.com or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. From the Fox News Podcasts Network.
Hey, this is Trey Gowdy, host of the Trey Gowdy Podcast. Every Tuesday, you'll hear what's on my mind. Plus, every Thursday, there's a special bonus episode where we answer the questions that are on your mind. Make sure to spend your Tuesdays and Thursdays with Trey. Subscribe now at foxnewspodcast.com or wherever you download podcasts. Hope to see you.
America's listening to Fox News.
Did you ever think about hosting your very own radio show? Here's how.
Hey, Tampa Bay, did you know you can have a 1-hour program on the Tan Talk Radio Network for less than the cost of one 60-second announcement on many Tampa Bay stations? That's right. We'll put you on the radio for less than the cost of one 60-second announcement on many stations. Check it out today. Use your program to promote yourself, your business, or someone else's business. Call Lola Jean, the broadcast queen, 727-510-7622. That's 510-7622. Call Lola Jean now to check out your Tan Talk network program. In addition to network radio, we'll stream your program in audio and video all over the world. Call Lola Jean now, 727-510-7622. Call today. Your network 1-hour program can start tomorrow. Broadcast your message in audio and video on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Tune in to the Shrink and Wrap Show here on Tan Talk Radio. Our stories and our topics will include, but are not limited to, everyday issues. We're here for you, for our listeners. We want to know what's important to you. So again, don't miss us on Tan Talk Radio. Tune in again, Shrink and Wrap Show. We'll see you then.
The Shrink and Wrap Show at its new time, Thursdays from 4 to 5 p.m. here on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Hi, I'm Dawn Reese with the Dawn Reese Show, most powerful names in entertainment, every Thursday at 5 p.m. I have so many different segments I'm so excited to share with you, from miracle stories to celebrity interviews with Hollywood connections to travel to local business, promoting your business on the air with me, an amazing opportunity to grow your business. Tune in to the Tan Talk Radio Network, 106.1 FM on Thursdays, 5 p.m. with me, Dawn Reese.
Hey everyone, it is Brandy Joy with the Brandy Joy Joyride. Feel free to hop in and have a good time with us every Thursday from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. This show is brought to you by One Unit, dedicated to bringing people together, letting your voices be heard, and of course we're here to entertain you, upbuild you, inspire you, and even hear from you. So every Thursday, tune in to 106.1 FM, Brandy Joy Joyride, and we will hear from you and let's have some fun.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
Now, the voice of reason continues here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Here again is your host for today's program, Ed Golly.
With me in the Tan Talk studio are my co-hosts, all attorneys. First, former Circuit Judge Kevin Carey, attorney Chris Griffin, and our senior political analyst, Gary Gibbons. Gary, take it away.
Well, you know, we were talking earlier this week about the things that we used to have in this country that we don't have anymore. And one is there's so much tribalism in our politics and so much. It's almost like a football game, you know. You're on team A or team B, and what they've started to do now is just there's so much hatred. You know, I find it interesting when I listen to right-wing media at all. I hear, you know, that Democrats are so awful that they'd rather support Russia than have, you know, a Democrat in office. And I thought, how did we get there? And I think when you look back at it, it's sadly, the media control has been, you know, all these AM radio stations around the country back in the mid 90s. Clinton signed legislation that allowed the consolidation of those. So you had, you know, iHeartRadio and some of those mega radio stations that were pumping Rush Limbaugh and all of these people to lots of voices across the country and spewing stuff that not necessarily is true. Nobody's fact checking these people that are on the air talk, just like nobody fact checks us, but we fact check ourselves. And we're happy to take, you know, calls from people that say, you know, you're crazy. I'm sure our engineer would love to say that right now. But you know, then we've gone into echo chambers.
I was just going to say, echo chamber is and we're all in our own echo chamber, admittedly. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to take a step out from time to time. Listen to what's going on in the other echo chamber. And my son taught me this. He's a very smart guy. And he said, Dad, I don't disagree with people. I just ask him to explain it to me. Well, that's interesting. Tell me why you think that. What's your perspective? What are the facts that drive your opinion? And he gets a lot more out of that than he does just saying you're wrong and my side is right. And I've tried to adopt his, what's that old Crosby, Stills and Nash, teach your children well, teach your parents well.
Well, part of the I think the reasons we thought it'd be helpful to have this topic is to allow people to understand it wasn't always this way and doesn't need to be this way. And one of the beauties of YouTube and the internet, you can go back and you can see debates. Chris, you and I and Gary, we talked about on water, and Ed, you as well. But Watergate, it was the Republicans in 1974 that went to Nixon and said you can't make it.
Right.
And so this really is not about politics. There've been, no one's perfect, no party or politician is perfect, but that's been one of the major failures today is the lack of any courage by the Republicans to stand up for what they know is wrong. Katie Couric, who you probably know from television, also has a podcast, but she had Bill Cassidy on, who's a physician, and she pushed hard on why would you support Robert F. Kennedy Jr. when you know what he's saying, we talked earlier about science, is scientifically not accurate. How can you accept that? And I'll add, by the way, you're going out the door. You don't have
have some courage,
have some cojones here. And he gave some kind of mealy mouth response to that. But I was kind of proud of Katie Couric for, she went at him. And but I would encourage our listeners and viewers to go back and you can find this information out there. You can watch a debate. I was trying to get an audio on this week. A discussion, a town hall that it was Ronald Reagan, he was governor of California, and Robert Kennedy, he was a senator from New York at the time. I think it was like 1965. And they had all these Rhodes Scholars, including Bill Bradley, who was, Princeton, who played basketball for the Knicks. But it was a discussion. The main issue there was Vietnam. But the point I want to make is, as you said, Chris, listen, there was no one yelling and you're stupid or you're ignorant. It was a discussion about, what's the can we gain a consensus here? Because I don't
or at least come to better understand the basis of what the other side is saying, whether the other side is Democrat or Republican, understand it. You might learn something, which is a remarkable concept these days, but just listen, maybe exercise a little empathy and try to understand where the other side's coming from so that you can have a truly meaningful discussion.
Well, I think, a good topic maybe for another theme for another show is the complete abuse of this executive order, because what it's done, it's precluded any debate for this country. I can't remember the last policy debate that I witnessed in Congress. Can you think of one in the last couple of years?
Nope.
When my uncle, Sam Gibbons, was elected to Congress in 1961, he moved the entire family up to Virginia. And he lived about 45 minutes outside of the Capitol. And he said all of the Congress people did that at the time. And you had your family there. And so you lived in a neighborhood. Your kids played on the same little league team. You went to the same, you went to churches together. They were friends outside of the Capitol. They would go and they would argue about policy differences, but that it wasn't personal. It was like what we were talking about earlier with lawyers. You don't make it about the other lawyer, hopefully, if you're a professional. But sometimes the other lawyer, just doesn't want to be that, and you're stuck with that in your case. But this has happened. He was there for 34 years, and at the end of his term, he was there during when Newt Gingrich took over, and he decided we're going to have this divide and conquer. We're gonna make this a tribal situation. And you look at the gerrymandering we've done, the closed primaries that we have, that feed this. Your base is your support. If you have a closed primary, if we had open primaries and people could vote across, we'd get rid of a lot of these people that are really hyper partisan. and crazy. And when I heard Paula Dockery, who was a state senator here in Florida for a number of years, and she was a Republican, and she said, for years the Democrats controlled the state of Florida and the legislature and the governor's mansion, and then that started to shift in the early 90s.
Right.
And she said the most productive legislative session that I was ever in the Florida legislature was when it was basically 50-50. We had that many Republicans and that many Democrats, and you had to work together across the aisle to do things, to try to pass a budget and do all the things. She said ever since that it's gotten way out of control with Republican control here. She said, they just don't, they pass whatever the leaders decide that they want to do. It's two people in the state decide what legislation is going to get passed in this state. It's crazy.
I had the pleasure of spending 3 years on the bench in divorce court with fighting. And I got to the point where I would say, well, Mr. Smith, tell me something good about your soon-to-be ex-wife. And I really would. And likewise, I would say in this context, tell me if you're a Democrat, tell me one good idea. They're not a bunch of idiots. I'm sure there's something you've heard from the other side of the aisle that you would agree with. And tribalism is the exact right word for it. And I think it has been driven by the silos, by the talk radio, where you can't accept. And there are many Republicans, as an example, who knew that Todd Blanche was not the best choice, and
of course,
but they had no opportunity to because this is a president who you pay a heavy price. Ask John Cornyn, who supported him on 99% of what Trump wanted. But it is a team game, and somehow, Chris and Gary, we need to. We're talking about attitude, and we talked about children and grandchildren. That's what kind of started the discussion a few weeks ago, Chris, when we talked about this. It's an attitude and about politeness and all the things that we're talking about.
But it's perhaps one step up the ladder. It's the exercise of courage. What a quaint notion. The great UCLA basketball coach, John Wooden, once said, character is what you do when nobody's watching. And you can take that same principle and apply it, I think, to the courage to be exercised by legislators, whether on the federal or state level, which is you're going to have to exercise some courage and do it publicly. You might lose the next election. But if you're not willing to do that, all of us working together, nothing good is ever going to happen. So, and I know I'm espousing quaint ideas, if you will, courage, civility, and the like. But I yearn for the days when I first began to follow politics. When, and going back to an example that you cited, the Watergate committee that uncovered most of the misdeeds had 3 Republicans, and 2 of them, Lowell Weicker from Connecticut and Howard Baker from Tennessee, were just as vigorous in their questioning of the witnesses as the Democrats were. And it didn't take as much courage back then as it does now, because they weren't ostracized the same way. But it's just a simple notion of political courage and exercising it to the end that is the correct end. That's simple. I'd sure love to see it.
And I think most politicians today would fail that test, Chris, in saying, is there something you believe in strong enough that you're willing to give up your career in politics? I think most politicians today would, by a large margin, would fail that test.
And they wouldn't admit it. But,
of course not. But part of what we need to do, and none of us are perfect. Like I've made mistakes over my life, but hopefully I've learned from them. But I think, again, we go back, you mentioned teach your children. I think as we're all on the back nine here, deep in the back nine, but we don't want this to be, and this is, I think, a theme we're seeing this year as an election year, of this is not how this country, we're not based on these principles.
Yeah.
And that's one reason other countries have looked to this country as a shining light, so to speak.
Or the Reagan's line of the shining some
city on a hill.
City on a hill.
You know,
which was a good speech. It was his farewell speech.
Yeah.
And it was a terrific speech.
And he talked about how America is great because we have immigrants.
Right. Right.
Think about that. He couldn't even get elected today.
Now, speaking of Reagan, Rodney Dangerfield was speaking at the White House, or not speaking, performing, and we've had Rodney Dangerfield, his jokes in here. But on the front row was Reagan. You saw in their wives, George Bush, Ronald Reagan, and Tip O'Neill, right next to him. And Tip O'Neill, they're both Irish, probably drinking buddies, but could not be further, misaligned on politics. But there they were laughing, and it is. We lawyers keep going back. I remember my grandfathers are both attorneys. My dad was in the Air Force, but my father would talk about how the lawyers would fight a case and go out and have a drink together.
Yep.
And something about that makes you feel good, but it's not the reality really anymore.
Yeah, but I'd like to feel good again. Let me put it that way.
I think at a basic level, that's what we're talking about. We know, the right. It's like I remember when you criticize someone or I'm talking too much, but when you gossip, someone said to me, or said it in a book, how do you feel when you do that? After you trash somebody, and if you step back, you don't feel good.
No.
And at some basic level, that's what we're talking about today.
And you haven't learned anything. Going back to the point I tried to make earlier, if you haven't listened, you're not going to learn anything. And we all need to learn things every minute of every day. And that's not going to happen.
I used to think that the end of our civilization was going to be the fact that we have cable news on 24/7, and they don't have enough to talk about. So they talk, they create tribalism as part of this. But now I think what really is killing us is the social media and the algorithms that are designed to make us fight with each other. The things that get sent to you in your feed are the things that have the most conflict, the most people butting heads and arguing online about stuff. And there's absolutely no legislation that is, on these social media companies. They don't have any controls. Anything can be put up there that's completely false. And yet, if it looks like it's in a meme that somebody typed it out, wow, that must be true. And that gets shared, through people in their own little bubbles. And then now that becomes what they think is true. And, we got to start dealing with some of these things, these societal ills, and bring them under control. I think they really have to have some sort of labeling, that now you open up Facebook, for example, and they have these reels and they just keep going. And they, you get fed whatever they think that you should see. And instead of saying, no, I don't want that, I should be able to turn that off. But no, that we don't have any restrictions on any of these companies. And now they're getting involved. Meta is now getting involved in the Florida election for governor. They're spending lots of money on ads to try to promote Byron Donalds. And
well, I only watch
system
the
is
reel.
Broken, folks.
I only watch the reels that show dogs and other animals. if I see a human being in the picture, I'm moving on to an animal reel.
If you read Stephen Jobs' biography, the founder of Apple, one of the things and I didn't know this till I read the book, that he was concerned about pornography, becoming, he did not want it to be a vehicle for pornography to get out there. And the point I'm making, the irony here is you got with the internet and just, I don't think we ever could have imagined the what's at our fingertips in 5 seconds, the world. But that at that same time, all the ignorance and all the garbage is also out there. And part of it, I think we as individuals need to take more responsibility. It's laziness. We don't want it to become this democracy. I don't want to sound, waving the flag here like Eddie Arnold on Green Acres. Remember, the lawyer became the farmer, and then you hear the bagpipes as he's making his speech. But the democracy includes an obligation of an informed electorate. And so it's really lazy to just play team ball and stay in the silo.
And this may sound off subject, but I don't think it is. And we've talked about this before. let's assume that the Democrats take control of the House. That's a minimum under my assumption, my hypothetical. There are so many red meat Democrats who want a Democrat-controlled House to do nothing but investigate the corruption from the Trump administration. And if we do that, we're going to lose the next election, because nothing is going to happen if all you do is investigate. Nothing's going to happen that helps the American people. Everybody's talking about affordability, the gas prices, all of the things that go into the basket of goods that we measure inflation by. My view, nobody's going to listen to me, but my view is spend the first year of a 2-year Congress passing or at least proposing legislation that's going to help Americans where and how they want to be helped. They're not going to be interested in seeing investigations, but there's going to be a lot of Democrats. That's all they want to see, because they've been having to live under this iron fist for so long.
I think that's a very good point.
Well, I think you have to walk and chew gum at the same time. You got to be able to do both things, and they should do both things, because the corruption is astounding in this administration, and it has to be investigated, and has not been. There have been no checks and balances on them. But you also have to say what you're in favor of doing for the country, and so they've got to do both.
And we do have good ideas. Progressives do have good ideas, and I agree with both of you. But it's going to take time. The issues are hard. What Trump has spawned with his whole approach to life, which is a lazy approach to life, is we're not going to get our hands dirty and deal with these issues. Social Security, for example, we've talked about a very obvious solution there is just to raise the cap. But these other issues are hard, and they're not easy to deal with. And we don't deal with any of those issues, but Congress has completely failed its obligation. The appellate courts, I think, have done the same. The only, as many of us have talked about, including Tom Skerritt last week and us around the table, the only group institution that's done its job is the federal district lower courts.
Right.
And I would recommend to our listeners to read these opinions. I mentioned these two opinions by this federal judge Indira Tawani. I know it seems like in the weeds, but these judges are writing opinions that can inspire you. And the one that she just wrote Tuesday with regard to the League of Women Voters injunction that was entered nationwide against this whole crazy postage, don't give out the ballots by mail scheme. It gives you some hope that someone is listening to me and understands. I mean, part of it, again, is ignorance. We're not going to teach civics in school. We don't want you to know what this country's based on.
Right. And what it's been through.
Exactly.
Yeah, it gives me hope when you see a judge that was appointed by Reagan, for example, who, was very conservative, come out and say, I can't believe what I'm seeing is being done by this administration. Aren't there any lawyers there? The types of quotes that you see in the opinions from this judge. And it's true. It's like, what happened to following the rule of law?
Well, maybe as the only non-lawyer at the table, I can offer a little insight as to why lawyers are so chummy. Whether I'm plaintiff or defendant in court, I'm never made whole again. Somebody steals money from me, the mediator says, well, accept half of what they stole from you and settle on those terms so you can get it settled. But the mediator gets paid in full. The lawyer gets paid in full, and I get screwed. No wonder you guys are all shaking hands and drinking together. The system does great for you and screws me every time.
Well,
I think the mediator, if he convinces me to take half of what I was robbed of, he should take half his fee. What do you think? Oh, no, not me. I want all my money. I get all my money. You get screwed. The system
what do I think? What do I think? Okay, well, I'm about to tell you what I think.
Okay.
Because 40 years a trial lawyer and now 10 years a mediator. And people will say to me, well, what's your success rate? To which I reply, well, how do you define success? I don't settle the cases. I facilitate a settlement of a case. If you're asking me how many cases that I mediate settle, I keep no track of it because it means nothing to me. All I can do is learn about the case, talk to the people. And to your point, Ed, my pitch always is, and we lawyers say this all the time, any reasonable settlement is better than going full-on litigation to court. But you're right. All of the professionals in the room get paid, including yours truly, because we hope to think that we're performing a service and we're being compensated for that service. But to say that the judicial process is not frustrating to a lot of people, I'd be a liar. So,
I mean, just quickly, 2 quick points. They teach us in mediation school that the best settlement is one where both sides walk out equally unhappy. And on the second point, I remember driving home when I was mediating on a Friday, going, gosh, I got a check for both, got a few $1,000s. Both checks bounced over the weekend.
for your services?
Yes.
Payment for your services?
One lawyer had the professionalism to actually make it right. The other one I never saw, but I just remember, I guess until the check clears, you never
haven't been
good.
paid. That's right.
Well, it's 1:30. Time for us to pause for a quick break. Stay with us here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. We're the voice of reason with Gary Gibbons, Kevin Carey, Chris Griffin, and me, Ed Golly. We'll continue. When we come back, we're going to hear Neil deGrasse Tyson describe his concerns about the relationship between the Trump administration and the institution of science. And we're going to step into the Wayback Machine just for fun, along with more of the issues the conservatives never want you to hear about.
Hey everyone, it is Brandy Joy with the Brandy Joy Joyride. Feel free to hop in and have a good time with us every Thursday from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. This show is brought to you by One Unit, dedicated to bringing people together, letting your voices be heard. And of course, we're here to entertain you, upbuild you, inspire you, and even hear from you. It's every Thursday. Tune in to 106.1 FM, Brandy Joy Joyride, and we will hear from you and let's have some fun.
You're listening to the voice of reason on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Check out the Randall Jenkins Real Estate Hour every Wednesday from 5 to 6 p.m., where Randall will help you with things like down payment assistance, real estate tips, how to use AI to enhance your real estate experiences, real stories about real estate, nightmares, and triumphs. Also taking your phone calls and much more. That's the Randall Jenkins Real Estate Hour every Wednesday from 5 to 6 p.m. here on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
Well, it's time for Poll Watch. 47% of Americans have little or no confidence in the Food and Drug Administration's ability to deal with the cyclospora outbreak affecting our lettuce. It turns out that there are something like 300,000 different food sources that for people that grow food around the world that come to the U.S. We only have 450 inspectors. So that Taylor Farms that had the cyclospora outbreak, that they think that they honed in on where it was in Mexico, they hadn't inspected that place since 2019. So it's no wonder. So
you mean no wonder that there's such little faith in the FDA?
Yeah, I share that, and that's been ignored. Again, everybody thinks on one side of the aisle that regulations are bad until you have explosive diarrhea. I guess 63% of adults believe that four-year colleges and universities are doing a poor job of providing an affordable education. And just 32% believe that colleges do an excellent or good job preparing students for the workforce.
I was biking around the campus of University of Florida yesterday, my little sojourn up there for the summer, which I'm enjoying. But you look around, you see the tower, Gary, you went there, and all the old buildings. And I thought about, how this has become politicized. They rejected for the first time in the history the prior presidential nominee because I guess they felt he wasn't conservative enough.
You mean for the president of the university,
yeah,
right?
Thank you for clarifying that. But I just was thinking this is, this I think false narrative that all these universities are just bastions of liberals that are brainwashing all of our children. it's just not true. And I just think it's just a shame that this institution was never meant to be a political volleyball and to say, well, we're going to judge the president of the university or the dean on some standard based upon its being too woke. We talked about, I think, the new college a couple of weeks ago, how that happened there. That's too liberal and woke. We need to change that. That was never about liberalism. That was about, Mark Brown, one of our former partners, Chris, went there. It was a very good liberal arts school.
Right.
Liberal arts doesn't mean you're liberal.
Right.
I think people get confused with that point.
Yeah. It's just a broad range education. But going back to the statistics on the FDA, I was driving over here today and I heard an ad for something and it said FDA approved. And my first thought was, what does that mean anymore? Which is to your point. And this is an example of where I really would like to learn from people, because we watched the executive order about splitting up the MMR vaccines. And it's all based on a study that was immediately debunked decades ago. And I think that the person who published the paper linking vaccines to autism lost his medical license. Mm-hmm. And I would just really enjoy having a conversation with a person or persons who support what the president did in his executive order and support what RFK Jr. is doing in terms of not paying attention to real science, and explain to me why they believe that's the best way forward. Because that's a policy point for which I can find no rational justification.
And think about the harm that causes at a human level. A mother, thinking that this child, is autistic because of a vaccine. There's even talk about some medication, Tylenol, but to put in that person's mind that
they did it, it's their fault,
and that's not politics. That's a level of human indecency. That this person now this mother is feeling guilty for no reason. It's not even, these are not close calls, because we're not having debates.
But Kevin, I truly don't get it. I don't understand why people are lemming-like and walking off the cliff of health and science, risking their children's lives, risking their lives. I just don't get it. And I wish somebody would explain it to me. I wish it wouldn't be the case. I wish we wouldn't change our vaccine regimens, because think of all the diseases that we eliminated and I think
polio.
When
I was growing up, I went to school with a couple of kids that were on crutches because they had polio, and there were iron lungs that people were living in, because they couldn't breathe because of polio. And we got a vaccine that was administered to us all in school, and so that there would not be, so that there would be herd immunity, and we were thankful for it.
As I recall, it was a little white
sugar
cup.
Water.
Yes.
Drank a little cup and you're good to go.
So the reason we have a quack with no medical training in charge of health and human services is because Trump wanted his votes. He wanted because he had been running for president.
That's right.
When he dropped, so all of these problems are a result of one guy trying to get in office. All 17 inspectors general have been fired. Why?
That's right.
So he can get away with unlimited crime. There's nobody to look into it. And incidentally, speaking of poll numbers, Trump's disapproval rating is now 62%, which is equal to what Richard Nixon's disapproval ratings were 2 weeks before he resigned the presidency over Watergate.
I was going to say, you talked about RFK Jr., and it's the fault of the president who did what he did in appointing the man. And also one of his motivations was to get his electoral support. But as we've been discussing, it's at least 50 members of the United States Senate who had no backbone. All of them, I can guarantee all of them knew that the person they were voting to confirm was horribly unqualified for that position. And this has been a theme today, and it is going to continue to be a theme, is those people have to have some courage and just look straight at them, look at the president and say, you cannot bring us a person of such low or non-existent qualification to run one of the most important departments in the country. That belongs to the Senate.
And of course, we see what he's doing to universities, cutting back the funding for all of this research they're doing. On a podcast we found, guest Neil Tyson revealed the devastating consequences of the relationship between the Trump administration and the institution of science. Let's listen.
The relationship of the executive branch and science has never been as devastating as it has been under the current administration. In the history, since science has been valued, let's start the clock there when Abraham Lincoln signed into law the National Academy of Sciences, which was intended to advise Congress on matters that would be of interest to our health, our wealth, our security, and the like. Ever since then, but more specifically where we have better accounting of budgets, since the Second World War, the role of science has been foundational to the strength of America in the world post-Second World War. We lost more than 10,000 scientists from the government this past year. Grants are being cut. Science research is being cut in universities. My colleagues are being cherry-picked by Europe. That's what we did for 50 years in the 20th century. My whole lab, there were like 3 Americans out of 10 scientists because they were attracted here. We got the best and the brightest of the world to come here. Bad for their country, good for us. The reverse is happening now. So, as far as I can read the headlines, we will sink lower economically in our health, our wealth, and our security until everyone wakes up and is reminded how important science is. I'm not saying that as a self-serving scientist. I'm saying that as a country-loving American citizen who grew up where science was beloved, and science is the engine of tomorrow's engineering, and engineering is the foundation of tomorrow's economies. And because you only see the engineering, you're not seeing what fed the engineering in the first place. So it's easy to believe that that doesn't matter. So I think we'll sink lower, then all of Congress will get together and they'll say, we got to do something about this. Let's shore up our science investments. There'll be a delay because we have to get everybody back. But when China starts eating our lunch, I think we'll wake up and sit up straight in the chair.
Yeah, China is eating our lunch. And I mean, in every respect, when it comes to, solar energy and transportation around the country, everything that they're doing is light years ahead of what we're doing, and it shouldn't be that way, and it didn't have to be that way. But we've set up this system in this country since, he said, after World War II, where the government funds universities to do the research, the scientific research that we need to develop products and vaccines and other things, and we've now just turned that spigot off and declared war against universities. Why? Because they're quote unquote woke? No, we're trying to be on the cutting edge of society and do things that need to be done to make the world a better place. We better start dealing with the climate change issue and scientifically instead of a knee-jerk reaction to say it doesn't exist.
Well, the world is making a rational response to what we're doing, just like with tariffs. Canada and Europe, we talked about this last week. They're going elsewhere, including to China. So it's every action has an equal reaction. These other countries are going to be reacting rationally and seeing when we're dropping the ball. It is a great opportunity for a country like China, one of the superpowers. And so it needs to stop. I want to just quickly follow up on a comment you made, Chris, just a second ago about the courage of these politicians. It also, I think, goes back a step further to the responsibility of the citizen. There are people that keep electing these cowards, and we ultimately need to take some responsibility for electing them. I mean, it's on us. We can, we the people sounds corny, but we can, and I think we're going to see it in a few months, change that dynamic. I know it's very hard. And then it goes back to another point, Gary, you made earlier about that the policies in this country are not representative of of what the majority of the public thinks. And I was listening. One of the benefits of preparing for this show was I listened to things and noticed things. One of the things I noticed last night on one of the radio shows was with the problem with this gerrymandering, and this was someone from the Lincoln Project talking, which is a fairly conservative group, but they're anti-Trump because they're just like anyone who sees this person should understand he's not being logical. But the point he was making was there are three institutions that are problematic here. We have the Electoral College, and that is not representative of the democracy because it's not weighted properly. And you look at the Senate. The Senate is not democratic. It's not weighted properly. You've got two senators in California and 2 in North Dakota. So where that leaves responsibility, this person was saying, is with the House of Representatives. And now what they've done there with this illegal gerrymandering and redistricting, Ed, is take away that. So that was the only institution that had any ability to be representative of the majority of the people of this country. So these aren't stupid people in this Project 2025, folks. They knew that
not
it's
stupid at all.
and this is minority rule. So it's all problematic.
It all goes down to gerrymandering, which started in a very vicious but effective way back in the 90s. Because if you look at the number of votes cast in this country during presidential election cycles, if you look at the votes for president, House of Representatives, and the Senate, most of the last few cycles, the number of votes for Democrats is so much larger than the votes for Republicans. But because of, as you pointed out, the Senate and its unequal representation for each person, and the Electoral College, that will of the people, that greater number of Democrat votes is not having any effect because of the undemocratic.
So why can't we have a debate? Why do we need the Electoral College? Has it outlived its purpose? These are not issues that we can't touch. We can, why can't we have term limits for U.S. Supreme Court justices?
Well, good way you put it. Why can't we discuss it? We can't discuss it because we won't discuss it. There is no way, and you know this, there's no way that the U.S. Constitution is ever going to be amended again. There's too many people who would have to exercise real courage to vote for it on the legislative level, and then.
But you don't need that for the Supreme Court justice. Term limits wouldn't require that. You would not need to.
No, you're right. That's a legislative act. You're right.
Electoral College,
which could only be done if you get rid of the filibuster.
That's right. You're right. You're right.
Yeah.
Yep. And I remember watching the debates in the Florida legislature on whether Florida should approve the Equal Rights Amendment. That takes us back, 60, 70 years?
Time.
Yeah. And I just don't see any of the kind of courage that we would need to amend the Constitution to eliminate the Electoral College or to change the way the Senate is constructed.
Because what happens, I was looking again a few weeks ago at an analysis of the 2028. It was a mock election between the vice president and the governor of California. But with this Electoral College, the election comes down to not only just a few states, a few counties.
Yep.
There's a county near Wisconsin. I mean, it's incredible that you can write off 99% of that map.
Yep.
And consequently, most politicians don't even travel to these states where they know that it's a waste of time.
And how many of those counties have election deniers in office as the supervisor of elections?
A lot.
A lot.
Yeah.
A lot more than we think.
But and I agree with you, Chris. It's not easy to do it, but at least let's spend our time on that discussion versus these silly things about Greenland and Canada and all this other
Kevin,
stuff.
I couldn't agree more. I'm just,
I agree with your point that
that
it's not going to be an easy task. I agree with that.
Yeah, it wouldn't be an easy task, and I've said this more than once. Recall that when Trump was first elected, he won the electoral vote, lost the popular vote by over 5 million votes. Can you imagine what would have happened if the reverse obtained, where he won the popular and lost the electoral? I literally was expecting blood on the streets. because of the reaction that would have occurred. And as you know, in our recent lifetimes, we've had two elections, one in 2000 and one in
2016.
2016, trying to do my math, where the winner, the ultimate certified winner, won the electoral vote, but not the popular vote.
But when you say can you imagine, he lost them both in 2020, and there was a riot.
We all know what happened.
So I guess it would have been worse in 2016. But yeah, I mean, there's something about that. I don't know. I think this process requires more participation at the citizenship level. I know that sounds kind of Pollyannish.
That's one of our themes today, is that for people to be thoughtful, people to be engaged, people to be willing to listen to what somebody else has to say. That's our only way out.
But as far as the responsibility of the Senate, let me take you back to 1964, and let's listen to Robert F. Kennedy speaking at Columbia University, expanding on his interpretation of the function of a United States Senator.
I think a United States Senator, however, is more than that. I think it's giving some leadership. And I think particularly for the state of New York, it's giving some direction. It's giving some leadership. It's showing some imagination. I think we have problems to face in this country. I think we have problems to face in this state over the period of the next 10 years. As President Kennedy said, we have the capacity to make this the best generation in the history of mankind or make it the last. And I don't think that we can just afford to stand still or sit. I think that we have to give some direction. And I think that the Senate of the United States is a place where the problems that we're going to work out, the problems that are facing this country internally, the problems that are facing us around the world, the Senate's going to give some leadership. The Senate's going to give some direction. And I don't think the state of New York should have any other than somebody who's going to make that kind of effort. I don't think that we can afford, in the 1960s, any state, anybody in the United States, and just being a follower. That's where I disagree.
That was, you mentioned 1964. He was running against the incumbent. It was a guy named Kenneth Keating, was the incumbent Republican senator from New York. I would, again, we can only run snippets here. I keep saying this, recommend to our listeners and viewers to Google RFK Senate question, but there are a number of aspects of that I thought were helpful. One was if you watch that, these students were asking him hard questions.
Yep.
One being, you don't even live in New York. You're from Massachusetts. You don't even sound like you're from New York. And he made the point that I guess he grew up. They had
spent more of his life in New York than any other place.
But then they asked him, why, aren't you doing this because you can be running for president in '68? And he said no, because Johnson. Little do we know what happened with Johnson. But then the funny part was he said, well, number one, and he said this, I was surprised. My dad's got all the money in the world. I don't need to work. And last I heard, I can still be called general for the rest of my life. So I don't need the title. So his point being, I'm doing this for all the right reasons. And I certainly think he would be rolling over in his grave knowing what his namesake son.
Oh gosh.
But there's so many aspects of this, asking tough questions. One of the things we haven't really talked enough about probably today is the obligation of the press to ask harder questions. I know Reagan would literally throw you out of the press room. The AP had to sue to get back in there.
Not Reagan, you mean Trump.
You said Reagan.
Yeah.
Pardon my wishful thinking.
You ask a tough question, you get thrown out.
I meant Trump. But the point being that there is an obligation on the part of the press to ask hard questions, and also, and we talked about this earlier in the week, about standing up when Trump calls someone a pig, or just says you're from that loser network. I'm not going to answer your question. For a colleague to say, wait a minute, I had that same question, but there's no courage there either.
Right.
And I know it's based upon fear because bully has to operate under fear. But you stand up to bullies, they tend to back down.
But then the Pentagon threw all of them out, unless they're loyalists to the conservatives.
That's exactly right.
And this week, Trump used them as decoys on Air Force One, and he said afterwards, I'm the number one target in the world, and if I go, you go. Maybe you ought to think about a different profession.
Yeah, by the way,
come on.
Did he say that?
He did.
By the way, Marco Rubio, he kept on that plane too. It makes you worry about what he thinks about Marco Rubio.
And Caroline Leavitt, who just quit her job.
Yeah.
Yes. That may not be a coincidence.
To spend more time with her family. She did just have a baby, so I guess but be glad to see her leaving the
Well,
podium
I
because she
understand
just,
applicants are being interviewed from Victoria's Secret. They got to show up in 4-inch spiked heels and have a minimum 48D chest size in order to get the job. So we'll see who they come up with next. America's own.
I missed that article, but keep going.
Well, what do you think he's
No,
going
no,
to? He's not going
I-
to bring anybody qualified. Do you know why Whiskey Pete was tagged to be the head of the Defense Department? It's not because he's qualified. Trump thinks he looks good on TV.
Yep.
He thinks the presidency is a reality TV show.
Yep.
And he
He's
treats
made
it
it
that.
one.
Yeah.
Well, and also, again, these all trigger important discussions. One would be the role of the press secretary. There was someone last night talking about that issue, saying, and they asked him who he thought had been the best press secretaries the last 25 years. He mentioned Jen Psaki. I think he did a pretty good job. He thought McCarty, is it Mike McCarty? Joe Lockwood under Obama. But there was a very good, again, an opportunity for a discussion about what is the role. And this press person talked about why I know that I can't get everything, but I don't want to be lied to. You may not have to give me all the information. But what he said, well, that was interesting. He said, one of the things that the better press secretaries do, they didn't kiss my ass. That wasn't my criteria. But they would say, well, I can't tell you this, but they might suggest another way to go. It wasn't this opposition.
Right.
But a mutual respect, maybe that's one of the points I'm trying to convey.
And the conveyance of accurate information to the public, which is the job of the press secretary.
Yeah, there is no question that the last few press secretaries under Obama, I'm jumping around, under Trump have flat out told lies.
Yeah.
You know, we talk about in law school as lawyers, there's a fraud of omission and commission. This is flat out commission, saying things that aren't true.
Well, you remember the very first day of the first Trump administration, Sean Spicer took to the podium to tell us that more people attended that inaugural ceremony than any other in the history of the country. And when that White House was challenged on it, what was her name? She was a close advisor, but she said, he's just presenting alternate facts.
Kellyanne Conway.
Kellyanne Conway, that's
Yeah.
right. Yep.
Yeah, but we could see the photographic evidence. And she stood or sat right there on Meet the Press and told Todd that with a straight face. And he started laughing at her. And she said, well, if you're going to laugh at me, I'm not going to come back.
But she being Caroline Leavitt?
No, Kellyanne Conway.
Oh, Kellyanne
She's
Conway,
the one that
right.
coined the phrase.
Right,
Yeah.
Well, why isn't this an opportunity to say this next press secretary, we're going to expect and demand someone who will tell us the truth. We don't just assume it's going to be another lackey that's going to say whatever lies coming out of your mouth, Trump. And we are, again, it's the standards have been lowered. And that's, again, a common theme today is why can't we expect more? We're not expecting them to agree with us. We understand that. And there have been some very good Republican press secretaries.
But to live to standards, to live according to standards and guardrails that existed in practice, not necessarily in law, but that's the way our country operated for 200, almost 50 years. There were standards that we all observed, persons in elected office. They could do a lot of things that they chose not to do because they had the power and the authority, but they knew that they would break through the guardrails of democracy that we'd established for over 2 centuries.
Well, we started out this discussion a couple hours ago. We as lawyers have those obligations and standards as attorneys. And we talked about last week that the scorecard is 10 lawyers disbarred who worked for Trump, 0 for any lawyer for the prior 6 presidents. And probably in counting, 10 in counting, we talk about Pam Bondi and
interesting
Jeanette. So there is a standard of conduct that lawyers have to follow. They don't always follow it, but they're expected to. And we need that same expectation in government.
And we need it in our next Department of Justice.
That would be nice.
It would be nice.
But can a democratically controlled Congress do anything about this Department of Justice, or injustice, as I call it? For example, if Blanche is found in contempt, what are the consequences of that? And can Trump get him out of that?
Well,
Could he actually be jail time?
Well, the context of that is in the judicial form. There are 4 types of contempt. There's direct, indirect, civil, and criminal. So there are 4. But we learned in judge school it's hard to do it. But the jurisdiction to do that would be with that federal judge. Now they'd appeal it, I'm sure, to the appellate court, but that would be for the province of the federal district judge who's having a hearing in a couple hours.
But to your point, and I think this is an important point, when Dwight Eisenhower faced a Supreme Court decision that was against a position of his, his question was, well, I've got a bigger army than they do. But the point applies here, because you hold a party in contempt in your former courtroom and the others that we've gone to. Something happens. You get a financial penalty. Sometimes you go to jail, but they're not going to put Todd Blanche in jail for a judge's contempt citation. So Ed, your question's very well taken. Is okay. Find me in contempt. How are you going to enforce that or do something to me that's going to make me comply with the subpoena?
The judge has the power to do it. Whether he wants to exercise that power is another question.
Well, wouldn't you agree that the sole reason that he's the attorney general is to keep the Epstein files hidden?
Oh, absolutely.
It sure looks like that.
So that's
that
what
is
he's
one of
going
his
to do.
primary goals. That's correct.
Yeah. Well, that's actually that wraps it up for today. It's all the time we have, except for time for our quote of the week, which is from a fellow named Andrew P. Napolitano. Here's what he said, quote, "What is it about the government and its agents and employees that they can lie to us with impunity, but we risk being sent to jail if we lie to them?"
There you go.
Well, we'll be back again next Thursday morning at 9 o'clock for another 2 hours of The Voice of Reason. I want to thank my co-hosts, Gary Gibbons, Kevin Carey, and thank you very much, Chris Griffin, for coming in. I'm Ed Golly, now reminding you, if the statement seems a little too implausible to be true, don't you believe it just because a conservative said it.
Make them prove it.
WTAN, Clearwater.
FM 106.1.
WDCF, Dade City.
FM 102.3.
Listen.